Konnichiwa, hello! Well, it's high time for a bit of a Japanese update here on the channel. If you're a regular, you'll know I've been learning the language since the start of 2019, and I last reported back actually as to where I got at the end of October. First of all, if you're new here, welcome. I'm Dr. Popkins. Here we talk about language learning from many angles, and if you haven't yet subscribed for the vibe, please do. You can get my free Language Learner Pro training by following the link underneath this video. Yeah, so I started learning this fascinating language at the beginning of 2019 in advance of my first trip to Japan, which took place in October 2019. And I think that's the last time I went abroad actually before COVID hit. So it's a even more significant trip than I thought it was going to be at the time. And since I got back in at the end of October 2019, my aim has been to do a focus study slot of 30 minutes 5 days a week, focus study on my Japanese, and that's basically what I've been doing. Last time when I reported back to the end of October 2020, I'd clocked up altogether since the beginning of 2019, 352 hours and 5 minutes of focus study on Japanese. What's been happening since then? Well, in November I managed 20 hours and 10 minutes over 25 days. In December, I put in 17 hours and 25 minutes over 20 days. In January 21, 18 hours and 5 minutes over 24 days. And in February 21, 10 hours and 47 over 20 days. So 8 days missed in February. And that means I've put in, since the very beginning, a total of 418 hours focused study on the language so far. I found actually working with this rather modest focus study slot goal of 30 minutes a day, 5 days a week, helped set me up for success. If I'd said I'm going to do an hour a day, I would have failed to reach that more often. And, you know, that's bad for motivation, I think. So do set yourself up for success, I would say. And, of course, nobody's stopping you if you're then really into the flow with a focus study session from doing a bit more. And I often do actually go on to do 40 minutes or even an hour on the language. I've been using various materials for the language, and I'll just quickly run through those before saying a bit more about the approach that I take. If you're a regular on the channel, you've been following these update videos, you'll know that Japanese from Zero, which is a 5-book course, had been my core resource really through to the autumn last year. And by the end of October, I'd finished book 3. I decided actually not to go any further with that course, and since then I've moved to other materials, but I do intend this year to dip in and out of it for some reinforcement. The other course I've had from the very beginning is the Assimile le Japonais, which is a hefty course. It's a French medium one, and that I have worked through and had worked through by the end of October, 44 of the 98 lessons. And since then, again, I've been dipping in and out of that course. It's got great audio, and each unit has a dialogue as the centre, which I think is a really great way to approach language. You can listen first, try and do a bit of dictation, for example, and you really get a lot out of that course. And then Japanese, Teach Yourself Japanese, an older course that I found last year, dating actually from the 1950s, but this is a 1977 edition. This is really, it's not one I'd recommend unless you're a hardcore language learner and you like quite old-fashioned exercise-based grammar translation approaches. But for me, it's been great for reinforcing the core language patterns, getting a bit more explicit explanation as a work of reference, and for reinforcing my core vocabulary as well. And I had one of my Japanese teachers, when I did a bit of speaking practice last summer, actually record some of the sentences from in there for me, so I've got an audio resource which I've added to it as well. And the other book I've been using since the autumn is Colloquial Japanese, again an old edition, and this has actually been the core of what I've been doing really from November through to February. There are 20 units in there, and by the end of February I'd worked through the first 18. I stopped there because the last 2 are about honorific language and brusque language respectively, which you don't really need so much as a learner. And I think though I've covered most of the grammar patterns of the language now through having done nearly all of the colloquial and from the other courses that I've been following. So that is, I think, quite satisfying. It means that I feel I'm standing or surveying, if you like, the landscape of the language. And I certainly know the enemy, as it were, now by this stage, what it's all about, how the language works. And I like to proceed from that basis, really, quite a systematic view, understanding what I'm learning. Talking about learning methods then, yeah, this time, unlike with my Basque, I've really delayed speaking. I mentioned I did a certain amount of speaking. I was on italki actually with the teacher last summer. That was just to try out the language, but I decided it was actually more efficient for me to focus on trying to internalize many more patterns and a core vocabulary the first 2,000 words or so before I start paying again for one-to-ones with a teacher, which is something I envisage, of course, going on to do because, yeah, if you want to get good at speaking, you've got to speak a lot. So I've mentioned dictation as a method I use. The Asimil is great for that. And the audio, actually, it's an old cassette that comes with colloquial Japanese. Lots of short dialogues in there. Also works pretty well for that method. So I've been doing that. A certain amount of flashcarding of the grammar patterns, typical sentence or phrase patterns, and individual items of vocabulary or chunks of vocabulary. So again, common phrases or words in a meaningful phrase so that you're learning in context is an approach I've been taking. And a lot of self-correct exercises from all of those courses. And one thing I've been doing recently with those is actually, rather than writing, is to record the answers in the voice recorder of my phone, because I feel that puts me under a bit of pressure to perform, and that can actually help, and I can check from the answers by listening through to the voice recording. Yeah, you've got time to think and get it absolutely right if you're doing it with a pen and paper, which is the way I always like to work with in exercises. But actually, sometimes just speaking it, I think is a good exercise as well. Talking about writing, I decided a few months in that I wasn't going to try and master the Japanese kanji characters, which are based on the Chinese characters at this stage. That to me is a 2-year self-contained project, really. I think it will be a lot of work. It's fascinating. It's something I want to do. But I want to be realistic about what I can achieve in the time available. And for me, getting basic speaking knowledge and good listening skills is more important, I think, in the short to medium term. But I did learn the kana, so the 2 syllabaries, which are also used in Japanese writing pretty early on. They're much easier to learn. You can learn them in a month or so. Keep practicing them. So when I do written exercises, I write the language in the kana. You can write the whole of the language actually using those syllabaries. That's what happens in children's books before children start to learn the characters. And so I've been trying to use those actively in my written exercises as well. Now, a big development, besides focusing in on colloquial Japanese really systematically in the last few months, has been starting to listen more. And I've given over the 10-15 minute slot, which I usually like to spend on YouTube with my coffee after lunch each day, now to Japanese listening practice. So getting listening input with the help of a couple of podcasts. One's called Thinking in Japanese, aimed at learners, and another one aimed at learners called Nihongo Kon Teppei, which is a bit quirkier. But I've been listening to one or the other of those each day, or just watching something aimed at natives actually on YouTube. I found some vlogging channels I'm enjoying, and several about photography or videography, things I'd be listening to in English anyway. Of course, most of that aimed at natives I don't understand. It's satisfying to realise I'm understanding more and more of the learner podcasts, but even the native stuff, with the pictures, it sort of helps, and the more you listen, the more you start to pick out. So looking forward then, in the next few months, really for the first half of the year, my plan is, now I've done the first 18 units of colloquial Japanese, to go back and to repeat that, to really repeat and keep working with Asimil, the bits that I've covered so far, really reinforcing my command then of these basic structures and vocabulary, and listening a lot more. And I think that's going to put me in a good position to then start speaking much more in the second half of the year. That at least is the plan. That's how it looks at the moment. It's steady as she goes. I know it's not dramatic, it's slow, it's methodical, it's modest, but I'm enjoying the process and continuing at that basis, and really feeling that, yes, the vocab is getting easier to remember, and things are starting to sink in. That's true, particularly with the Pinsleur, as I listened to the audio course, which I started doing again. I started back at level 2. And some might find it boring to repeat materials, but for me, going through a second time and realizing how much more I actually understand now is really, really satisfying. Actually, it does give a bit of a feeling of progress. You don't need to be pushing at the limits of what you can do, it seems to me, all the time. So that's where it's at. It's going to be steady as she goes, if you like, for the first half of this year. If you're a Japanese learner, how's it been for you so far? Does my approach sound like the one that you're using, or are you taking it in a different way, and why? I'd love it if you'd share your thoughts in the comments below. Similarly, it's great to hear from those who've already got fluent in Japanese, or teachers, what you think and what you would recommend. So as always, thanks a lot for watching. Keep at it with your language learning, and in a month or two's time, I'll update again as to what's happening on Japanese. Thanks a lot for being with me here on the channel, and look forward to seeing you in the next video. じゃあまたね